She walked into that emergency room carrying a resume no one bothered to read and a skill set no one in that building could match. The first thing Dr. Richard Pembroke said to her wasn't "welcome to my." It was, "Try not to kill anyone on your first day." He laughed. 3 nurses laughed with him. Clara Thompson smiled not because it was funny, but because she had heard worse. Much, much worse. In places where a mistake didn't just cost someone a job, it cost someone a life. And she had never lost one, not once. If this story already has you hooked, hit that subscribe button right now and drop the name of your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now settle in because this one is going to stay with you. Clara Thompson did not walk into Mercy General Hospital thinking she was going to save anyone that day. She walked in thinking about parking, about whether she'd remembered to lock her car, about the fact that she hadn't eaten since 5 in the morning, and it was now 7:30 at night, and the vending machine on the second floor was, according to the nurse who'd processed her paperwork, perpetually sold out of everything except the peanut butter crackers that tasted like cardboard soaked in regret. These were the thoughts of a woman trying very hard to feel ordinary, normal, civilian. But the moment Clara stepped through those automatic doors and the smell hit her, antiseptic and adrenaline, and something underneath it all that you never really forget once it gets into you, her body remembered what her mind was trying to let go. Her spine straightened without her telling it to. Her eyes swept the room in a single practiced arc. Exits, patient staff positions, potential threats. Old habit, the kind that kept you breathing in places most people had never heard of. She caught herself doing it and forced her shoulders down. Civilian, she reminded herself. You're a civilian now. The charge nurse at the front desk was a woman named Roberta, broad-shouldered and sharp-eyed with reading glasses perched halfway down her nose, in the expression of someone who had processed approximately 10,000 new hires and been impressed by exactly none of them. She looked up at Clara the way a toll booth operator looks at a car necessary inconvenience move along. "Thompson," Roberta said, not really asking. "That's me," Clara said. Roberta slid a badge across the counter without ceremony. "Orientation was last Tuesday. You missed it." "I was finishing up some paperwork with the VA." Roberta's eyes moved back to her screen. "Dr. Pembroke runs this floor. You'll shadow whoever he assigns you to for the first 2 weeks. Don't touch anything without permission. Don't offer opinions. Don't try to kill anyone," Clara said. Roberta blinked, looked up. "Someone already gave me that one," Clara said pleasantly. For just a fraction of a second, something shifted in Roberta's face, not quite a smile, but the possibility of one. Then it was gone, sealed back behind the wall of professionalism and exhaustion and years of watching rookies flame out before they had unpacked their locker. "Room 4, Roberta said. "Dr. Pembroke is waiting." He wasn't waiting. That was the first thing Clara noticed. Dr. Richard Pembroke was performing. There was a difference, and it was immediately apparent to anyone trained to read a room under pressure. He was standing at the center of a cluster of nurses and residents, chart in hand, delivering what could only be described as a monologue, loud enough to be overheard, measured enough to sound authoritative, calibrated precisely to remind everyone in a 10-foot radius exactly who was in charge. He was tall, good-looking in a practiced, maintained sort of way, the kind of handsome that required effort and knew it. Silver at his temples that he'd probably stopped fighting years ago because it made him look distinguished rather than old. His coat was impeccable. Clara waited. She had waited out insurgents in doorways smaller than most Americans' bathroom closets. She could wait for a doctor to finish his performance. When he finally turned to look at her, his eyes did the same thing everyone's eyes did, a quick, unconscious assessment. She was 38. She looked at maybe a year or two younger, medium height, lean, the kind of fit that didn't come from a gym, but from years of carrying weight across uneven terrain. Her hair was pulled back in a way that was functional rather than styled. There was a small scar along her left jawline that she'd long since stopped noticing. He noticed it. "Thompson," he said, not a greeting, a label. "Dr. Pembroke," she said, "Roberta tells me you missed orientation." "I was finishing discharge paperwork with the VA." Something in his expression shifted slightly, a micro-expression quick and dismissive. "VA, right. So you were military. Army medical, 12 years. Combat." The word had a particular weight when civilians used it, like they were testing something. seeing if she'd flinch or puff up or launch into a story he'd have to pretend to care about. When it was necessary, Clara said, he made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Well, he gestured broadly at the emergency department around them, the organized chaos of gurneys and monitors and staff moving with the particular urgency of people who had too much to do and not enough time. This isn't a battlefield, Thompson. This is a hospital. Different skill set entirely. Of course, she said. She didn't argue. She had learned a long time ago that the most efficient response to arrogance was patience. Let people believe what they wanted to believe. The truth had a way of surfacing on its own schedule. You'll shadow Nurse Kim for your first week, Pembroke said, already turning away. Watch, learn, and please. He paused, and there it was again, the performance the audience of residents and nurses arranged around him like props. Try not to offer any of your military expertise. We run things a certain way here. Someone snickered, not loud enough to be insubordinate, loud enough to be heard. Clara let it go, for now. Nurse Kim was 26 years old, 3 years out of nursing school, and possessed of the particular brand of earnestness that either got burned out of young medical professionals in their first few years or calcified into something genuine and unshakable. Clara could tell within 10 minutes of working alongside her that Kim was going to be the latter. She cared. It showed in everything, the way she spoke to patients, the way she checked and double-checked, the way she asked questions without embarrassment. So you were really in the Army? Kim asked, handing Clara a clipboard as they moved between bays. Really was. That's incredible. How long? 12 years? Got out 18 months ago. Kim processed this. Is it weird being here instead of... She gestured vaguely as if the alternative to a hospital was simply there somewhere, undefined and vast. A little, Clara admitted, but weird in a good way. That was partly true. The other part, the part she didn't say, was that it was also weird in the way that all transitions were weird, like learning to walk in a different gravity. Everything familiar but slightly off. The same actions producing slightly different results. Don't mind Dr. Pembroke, Kim said, lowering her voice. He's like that with everyone new. He's actually a really good doctor. I believe it, Clara said, and she did. Arrogance and competence weren't mutually exclusive. She'd served under brilliant men who were also insufferable. The trick was learning which qualities you could learn from and which ones you had to work around. He's not great with people who have experience from outside traditional medicine, meaning he doesn't know what to do with soldiers. Kim winced slightly, meaning he doesn't know what to do with anyone he can't immediately place in a hierarchy he understands. Clara looked at her. That's very perceptive. Kim shrugged. I've been watching him for 3 years. The first 4 days passed the way first days always pass, in the particular agony of demonstrating competence to people who are determined not to see it. Clara took vitals. She charted. She assisted with procedures she'd perform solo in conditions that would make half the staff in this building physically ill to imagine, and she did it quietly, efficiently, without complaint or commentary. She saw things. Of course she did. She saw the resident on day 2 who missed a line twice and was too proud to ask for help. Clara handed him the supplies he needed in the correct order, without being asked, and he took them without acknowledgement. She saw the intake nurse on day 3 who was documenting a patient's medications and entering the wrong dosage. Clara simply said, I think that one's a 20 milligram, not a 200, and the nurse corrected it without a word of thanks. Small things, invisible to anyone not paying attention. Dr. Pembroke was not paying attention. He moved through the department like a man who had long ago decided he'd already learned everything worth knowing in this particular room, and Clara Thompson was simply another body to maneuver around. That was fine, for now. Day 6 was when things shifted. It started with a man named Gerald, 62, admitted for what had been initially logged as acute abdominal pain, likely related to his documented history of IBS. He'd been triaged, medicated for pain, and was waiting for imaging results in Bay 7. Comfortable enough, stable enough, the kind of patient who exists in a busy ER as a low-priority item on a very long list. Clara was passing Bay 7 when she stopped. She didn't decide to stop. Her body stopped. She looked at Gerald, really looked the way she'd been trained to look in environments where missing something meant someone didn't come home, and she felt the cold, specific recognition of something wrong. Not the kind of wrong that shouted, the kind that whispered. His color was subtly off. Not dramatically pale, just slightly in the way that you'd miss entirely if you were moving fast or if you expected him to be fine. His breathing was half a beat faster than his chart indicated from intake. He was restless in the particular way that wasn't pain restless, but confused restless, though if you asked him directly, he'd probably say he felt about the same as before. She checked his temperature without his noticing her concern. Then his blood pressure. Then she pulled up the notes from the last 2 hours, and her stomach went quiet and cold. She went to find Dr. Pembroke. She found him at the nursing station reviewing charts with a resident, the two of them engaged in what appeared to be a pleasant conversation about a golf tournament. Dr. Pembroke, she said. He didn't look up immediately. Let a beat pass, the kind of pause that communicates hierarchy without words. Thompson. The patient in Bay 7, Gerald Morrow. I think he may be going septic. Now he looked up. His expression was not alarm, it was the specific, measured expression of a man deciding how to respond to an inconvenience. Morrow is here for abdominal pain with a documented GBMI history, he said. I know what the chart says. His temperature has climbed 1.4 degrees since intake. His blood pressure has dropped 8 points, and his mental presentation has shifted. He's not oriented the way he was 40 minutes ago. Pembroke looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at the resident, and some wordless communication passed between them, the kind that excluded her as efficiently as a closed door. Thompson, he said with the patience of a man addressing someone very young or very slow. You've been in this department for 6 days. Sepsis presents with a very specific constellation of symptoms, and what you're describing is within normal variance for a patient on pain management. I know what sepsis looks like, Clara said. She kept her voice level, even, factual. I've treated it in the field without a laboratory. I'm asking you to run a lactate and a CBC and take a second look at him. We'll get to his imaging when radiology. He may not have time for radiology, she said. The silence that followed was not comfortable. It was the silence of a man who was not accustomed to being interrupted and was deciding exactly how much to show of his displeasure. Thank you for your input, Thompson, he said finally. The words were professionally courteous. The tone was a door closing. I'll note your concern. He turned back to the resident. Clara stood there for 1 moment. 2. Then she walked back to base 7. She did the only thing she could do with what she had. She pulled a chair to Gerald's bedside. She talked to him not about medicine, about his family, about the granddaughter whose picture he had in his wallet, and showed her without much prompting. She monitored. She documented everything she observed with the precision of someone who understood exactly what it meant to create a paper trail. She noted every vital at every interval. She flagged every deviation, however small. And she stayed. 23 minutes after Dr. Pembroke told her to mind her chart and trust the process, Gerald Morrow's blood pressure dropped 11 points in 7 minutes. His eyes went glassy. His words stopped making sense. Clara was already at the door of base 7 calling for backup before the monitor alarm had time to sound. What happened next was loud and fast and completely controlled, not by Dr. Pembroke, who arrived on the scene with the expression of a man whose narrative was collapsing around him, but by the accumulated momentum of Clara's 23 minutes of documentation, her specific and immediate instructions to the staff who responded, and the particular authority that some people carry not in their voice but in their certainty. Septic shock, she said to the responding team. Not a question, not a suggestion, a fact delivered with the calm of someone reporting weather. Get me a lactate blood cultures ×2 and start broad-spectrum antibiotics now. Wide-bore IV, access fluid bolus 15 liters normal saline. Go. They went. They went not because Clara had a title. They went because in the middle of chaos, some people speak with the voice of someone who has been here before, not in this building, not in this emergency room, but here in the specific geography of a life in the balance, and every instinct in the room recognized it. Dr. Pembroke stood at the periphery and watched. Gerald's lactate came back at 4.8. Septic shock, confirmed, severe. They stabilized him over the next 40 minutes. It was closer than anyone wanted to say out loud except Clara, who documented every minute of the delay between her initial report to Pembroke and the beginning of treatment with the same quiet, methodical precision she brought to everything. Not for revenge, because the record mattered, because the next Gerald deserved better than the last one got. When Gerald was finally stable, color returning pressure, Normalizing confusion clearing, he grabbed Clara's hand. You stayed, he said. I did, she said. Most folks, he stopped, his voice rough. Most folks would have moved on. I don't move on easily, Clara said. From the doorway, she heard movement. She looked up. Dr. Pembroke was standing there, chart in his hand, watching her. His face was unreadable in the particular way that faces become unreadable when they're working very hard to process something they didn't expect. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he walked away without a word. The nurses on the floor that night were quieter around Clara than they'd been before. Not friendlier exactly, not yet. But the particular quality of the silence had changed. Before, it had been the silence of indifference, the deliberate inattention you give to someone you've already categorized and set aside. Now it was the silence of attention, of people watching without wanting to be caught watching. Kim found her at the end of the shift in the break room, eating the peanut butter crackers from the vending machine because she still hadn't had dinner and they were in fact terrible. I heard what happened, Kim said, sitting across from her. News travels fast. It always does in here. Kim hesitated. Pembroke's never going to say he was wrong, you know. Clara looked at her. I know. It doesn't bother you. Clara considered the question honestly. I didn't do it for him, she said. I did it for Gerald. Kim was quiet for a moment, and then, where did you serve? Clara looked down at her crackers. Places I'm not allowed to be specific about. Places where the difference between paying attention and not paying attention was measured in exactly this way, in whether someone made it home or didn't. The break room was quiet. That's why you stayed with him, Kim said. Not a question. That's why I stayed with him, Clara said. Outside the break room, Mercy General kept moving at its relentless, indifferent pace. Gurneys rolled. Monitors beeped. People arrived broken and left, if they were lucky, less broken than before. And somewhere in Bay 7, Gerald Morrow was breathing steadily, his granddaughter's photograph still in his wallet, his life still intact because one person had refused to look away. Clara finished her crackers. They were exactly as terrible as advertised. She didn't care. She went back to work. The morning after Gerald Morrow's crisis, Clara arrived at Mercy General 40 minutes before her shift started. Not because she was anxious, because she was smart enough to know that the 24 hours following an incident like last night's were the most important ones, not for the patient who was stable and improving, but for the politics of the floor. And in any environment where survival depended on knowing the terrain, you showed up early and you watched. What she saw told her everything. The night shift nurses were clustered near the station, and the conversation stopped the moment she pushed through the door. Not abruptly, carefully, the kind of stop that required effort. 3 of them looked at their charts. One of them, a heavy-set man named Dave, who she'd seen twice and never been introduced to, looked directly at her and then looked deliberately away, which was somehow worse than being ignored. She had been the subject of the conversation. She had no doubt about that. The question was which version of last night they were telling. She clocked in, she got her assignments, she went to work. By 9:15, she had her answer. It came in the form of a resident named Marcus Webb, 29 second years, sharp enough that he usually kept his mouth closed rather than say the wrong thing. He fell into step beside her in the hallway outside Bay 3, and for a moment they walked in parallel silence, which told her he was working up to something. So, he said finally. So, she said. Last night, he said it the way people say something when they've been thinking about it for hours. The sepsis call. What about it? He was quiet for a beat. I was there when you told Dr. Pembroke. I was standing right there. He paused again. I've been running scenarios in my head all night. What I would have done, whether I would have pushed the way you did. And he exhaled. I don't think I would have. He shuts people down. You know how he does it? It's not even loud. It's just this. He made a gesture that somehow conveyed the entire architecture of condescension. And you just didn't stop. No, Clara said. How do you do that? He wasn't mocking her. He was genuinely asking. She considered it. You stop caring whether they respect you, she said. And you start caring only about whether the patient makes it. Those 2 things can't both be your priority at the same time. You pick one. Marcus absorbed that. Then, Pembroke's not going to make this easy for you. He was already not making it easy. I mean specifically, going forward. He's the kind of man who remembers. Clara stopped walking. She looked at Marcus directly. Are you warning me? He met her eyes. I'm just telling you what I see. I appreciate that, she said, and she meant it. Are you going to be a problem? He blinked. Then he almost laughed, surprised out of whatever he'd been preparing to say. No, he said. No, I don't think I am. Good, she said and kept walking. Pembroke arrived at 10. She heard his voice before she saw him, that particular register carrying authority without effort, the hallway acoustics of a man who never modulated because he'd never needed to. She tracked him by sound for a moment, the way she'd once tracked movement in buildings where seeing around corners wasn't an option. He came around the corner and their eyes met. He held it exactly 1 second longer than necessary. Then he looked down at his chart, redirected to a nurse at the station, and began his morning briefing as if Clara Thompson were a piece of furniture. Not hostile, worse dismissive. The performance of a man who had decided overnight that the best response to last night was to treat it as nothing, to reduce what she had done to an anomaly, a fluke, a single data point that didn't require reassessment. Clara went back to work. She checked on Gerald. He was sitting up asking about breakfast, annoyed that they'd taken his phone charger for the night. His daughter had arrived, a compact, intense woman in her 40s who looked like she hadn't slept and had opinions about everything, and when Clara walked in, she stood up from the chair with an expression that landed somewhere between gratitude and interrogation. You're Thompson, she said. I am, Clara said. You're the one who caught it. I noticed some changes in his vitals and the nurse at the front desk told me that the doctor on duty had already signed off, that you went back anyway. The woman's jaw was tight. Is that true? I stayed to monitor his condition, yes. Gerald from the bed made a sound that was both fond and exasperated. Ellen, she's not on trial. I'm not putting her on trial, Dad. I'm thanking her. Ellen's voice cracked slightly on the last word. She pulled it back together fast, the reflexive competence of someone who didn't allow themselves to fall apart in public. He is all I have, she said quietly. He is it. I can't. She stopped. Thank you. Clara nodded. She didn't deflect or minimize or produce any of the standard reassurances that people in her profession sometimes used to create distance from the weight of what they were being handed. She just accepted it, held it. He's doing well, she said. He's going to be okay. Because of you. Because he's stubborn, Clara said. Gerald laughed. Ellen almost did. Clara finished her check, updated the chart, and left them to it. In the hallway, she stood still for exactly 5 seconds. Let the moment pass through her. Then she kept moving. The first real shot across the bow came at 11:40. She was assisting in base 6, a woman in her 50s, chest pain, almost certainly anxiety-related, but requiring full cardiac workup until proven otherwise when Dr. Pembroke appeared in the doorway. He looked at Clara, then he looked at the patient, then back at Clara. Thompson, he said, I need you on the intake desk. We're short. I'm mid-assessment, she said. I'm aware. He kept his voice pleasant, professional. Nurse Kim can finish. Kim was in the room. Kim looked at the floor. Clara looked at the patient. The woman, her name was Sandra. She'd arrived alone. She'd been gripping the bed rail since intake, looked back at her with the expression of someone who'd been passed around enough already to recognize when it was happening again. 2 minutes, Clara said to Pembroke. Something flickered across his face. The intake desk. 2 minutes, Clara said again. Calm, final. She turned back to Sandra. Can you tell me if the pressure feels different when you breathe in versus when you breathe out? Pembroke left. Sandra answered her questions. Clara documented everything that mattered, made sure Kim had a complete handoff, thorough, specific, nothing left to interpretation, and then walked to the intake desk where she spent the next 45 minutes doing work that did not require any of her training whatsoever. She did it without complaint. She did it without resentment. She did it with the same focused attention she brought to everything because she'd learned long ago that the tasks beneath you were the ones most likely to reveal whether you had actual discipline or just the performance of it. But she marked it internally, filed it away with the professional part of her mind that had been keeping records since day one. By 2 in the afternoon, the ER had found its particular mid-shift rhythm, not quiet, never quiet, but a specific kind of controlled chaos that experienced staff navigated with the muscle memory of people who'd been doing it long enough that urgency felt normal. Clara was at the medication cart cross-referencing orders when she heard the argument. Not loud, pacific. 2 voices from the break room, Pembroke and another attending, Dr. Yolanda Harris, who was the only physician on the floor who had acknowledged Clara with anything resembling equality since her arrival. Yolanda Harris was 51, had trained at Johns Hopkins, and moved through the ER with the efficiency of someone who had long since stopped performing and was purely entirely functional. Clara respected her immediately. She wasn't trying to listen. The break room door was half open. "It's creating a dynamic that undermines the team," Pembroke was saying. "She caught a sepsis case that was deteriorating," Yolanda said. Her voice was even, surgical. "I'm not sure how that undermines anything." She contradicted a direct clinical assessment in front of staff and patients. She flagged a concern to the attending. That's exactly what she should have done. "She doesn't have the background. She has 12 years of military medicine, Richard." A pause. "When was the last time you diagnosed sepsis in a tent with no CBC results and no backup?" Silence. "She's going to create confusion about chain of command," Pembroke said finally. "Quieter now. The shift from argument to justification. New staff need to understand how things work here." "What I understand," Yolanda said, "is that Gerald Morrow is alive, and I'd like it to stay that way for future patients." Clara moved away from the medication cart. She didn't want to hear whatever came after that. Not because it wasn't important, but because she'd already heard the thing that mattered. There was at least one person in this building who saw clearly, and that was more than she'd had 24 hours ago. The afternoon brought 3 new admits. In 30 minutes, a teenager with a possible broken wrist, a man in his 70s who'd passed out at a grocery store and scared everyone who witnessed it half to death, and a woman in active labor who'd been planning a home birth until the plan changed rapidly and dramatically. The labor case went straight to OB. The fainting man was Clara's, handed to her directly by Yolanda Harris, who met her eyes when she did it, and in that look communicated something that didn't need words. His name was Walter Chen, retired, former high school history teacher, which he told her approximately 30 seconds after she introduced herself, because he was the kind of man who defined himself by what he'd given the world rather than what had brought him to the ER. "I just went down," he said, slightly bewildered, slightly embarrassed. "Margaret, my wife, she was reaching for the bread and I was just gone." "Has this happened before?" before, Clara asked. "Never. I'm healthy as a well." He made a gesture that acknowledged the irony of saying that from a hospital bed. His rhythm was irregular, not dramatically the kind of irregular that you could explain away a dozen different ways. Clara ran her questions carefully, building the picture methodically, the way a field assessment built from the ground up rather than from the top down, starting with what was observable and working inward. When she got to his medication list, she paused. "You're on a beta blocker," she asked. "The cardiologist changed the dose about 3 weeks ago, doubled it." She looked up. "And did he adjust your blood pressure medication at the same time?" Walter frowned. "No, should he have?" She kept her expression neutral, warm but focused. "Did you feel dizzy this morning before you went to the store?" "A little. I thought I hadn't eaten much." He paused. "Is something wrong?" "I'm going to run some tests," she said. "I want to make sure we understand the whole picture." She was already reviewing his chart with the part of her mind that operated simultaneously with the part that was keeping him calm and at ease, a split attention skill. She'd developed in environments where the person in front of you needed reassurance and the situation around you needed vigilance, and there was exactly one of you to provide both. The beta blocker dose, combined with his existing blood pressure medication, was almost certainly producing compounding hypotensive effects. In a younger, perfectly healthy person, manageable. In a 72-year-old man doing moderate activity in a warm grocery store, a recipe for exactly what had happened. She documented everything and sent her notes to Yolanda. Yolanda reviewed them in 4 minutes and called the cardiologist's office herself. No drama, no argument, no performance. Just 2 professionals moving in the same direction. Clara noticed the difference, the way your body notices temperature change, not intellectually but physically, in the easing of some low-level tension she'd been holding since her first day. At 4:30, Dave, the nurse who'd looked away from her that morning, appeared at her elbow with a supply cart. "Bed 9 needs a redress," he said. He didn't look at her directly. "I figured you were closer." "I am," she said. "Thanks." He started to move away, then stopped. "For what it's worth," he said, still not quite looking at her. His voice low and slightly gruff, the voice of a man delivering something he wasn't entirely sure he should be delivering. "What you did last night with the Morrow guy. He stopped again. It was the right call, Clara said simply. Not fishing, not waiting. Yeah, Dave said it was. He pushed the cart and left. It was not an apology. It was not a declaration of alliance. It was a man in his 50s telling her the truth in the only way he currently knew how, which was sideways and quiet and with his eyes somewhere else. She understood. She'd spoken that language herself in years, when saying things directly felt like exposure she couldn't afford. She went to bed 9. She redressed the wound. She did her job. The twist came at 6:17, and it came from a direction she hadn't been watching. She was charting at the station when Roberta, impassive, unreadable Roberta, who had spoken to her perhaps 12 words since orientation, appeared beside her and set a folder on the desk without comment. Clara looked at it. Her name was on the tab. What is this? Clara asked. Incident report, Roberta said. She had the expression of someone delivering mail present for the transaction, absent from its meaning. Clara opened it. It was a formal write-up, dated this morning. The language was careful and clinical, the kind of language that had been reviewed by someone who understood exactly how to say something damaging in a way that sounded procedural. The core of it was simple. Clara had failed to defer to the attending physician's clinical judgment, had taken unilateral actions outside her designated scope during her probationary period, and had created a disruptive dynamic that required formal documentation. It was signed by Dr. Richard Pembroke. She read it twice. Then she closed it. Is there a response process? She asked Roberta. 24 hours, Roberta said. In writing. Roberta walked away. Clara sat with the folder in front of her for exactly the length of time it took her to decide what she felt. Anger, yes, briefly hot and clean and entirely justified. Then something cooler, something that had been forged in more unforgiving conditions than a hospital floor and had come out the other side of those conditions harder and more precise. She picked up a pen. She pulled a blank form from the stack beside the printer. She began to write her response, not with emotion, with evidence, with timestamps, with the documented vital sign records she'd been carefully maintaining since day 6. With Gerald Morrow's lactate result in the 23-minute gap between her initial report to Pembroke and the beginning of treatment, every minute of which she had logged every observation she had noted, every deviation she had flagged in writing. She built it the way she'd been trained to build reports in the field, precise, verifiable, impossible to dismiss without dismissing the facts themselves. Yolanda Harris walked by the station, slowed, looked at what Clara was writing. He filed on you, Yolanda said, not a question. This morning, apparently. Yolanda stood there for a moment. Something moved through her face, not surprise, not quite. Something older and more tired than surprise. Do you need a witness statement? She asked. Clara looked up. For your response, Yolanda said. To the report, I was present for the patient outcome. I reviewed your documentation. She held Clara's gaze. Do you need a witness statement? Clara held still for a moment, the way you hold still when something you'd stopped expecting suddenly arrives. Yes, she said, I do. Then you'll have it by end of shift. Yolanda walked away. Clara turned on back to her response. She kept writing. The ERR kept moving around her gurneys and monitors and voices and the relentless forward motion of a place that never paused for anyone's paperwork, anyone's politics, anyone's private reckonings with what was right and what was required. She wrote until she'd said everything that needed saying. Then she signed it. Then she filed it. Then she went back to her patients. Because in the end, that was the only part she had ever been doing this for. The incident report sat in the hospital's administrative system for 31 hours before anyone in leadership acknowledged it. Clara knew this not because she was watching, she wasn't, but because Marcus Webb told her in the careful way he'd developed of delivering information sideways, like he was handing her something breakable. 31 hours, he said, falling into step beside her in the hallway outside radiology. And the only response so far is a form letter acknowledging receipt. That's procedure, Clara said. Yolanda's statement went in the same day as yours, same file. He paused. Pembroke knows. Of course he knows. He's been quieter than usual. Clara almost said that's not necessarily a good sign and stopped herself. She'd learned to be careful with Marcus, not because she didn't trust him, but because trust was something she extended in increments, the way you cross uncertain ground. Test the weight before you commit. Quiet men with wounded pride, she said instead, are more dangerous than loud ones. Marcus considered that. You sound like you've dealt with this before. I've dealt with every version of this before, she said. The loud ones show you exactly where the threat is. The quiet ones make you find it yourself. She left him with that and kept walking. The morning of day 9 brought a cold front and a surge in admissions that had nothing to do with the weather and everything to do with the particular chaos theory of emergency medicine, the way busyness begot busyness, the way a floor operating at 90% capacity could tip into 120 in the time it took to drink a cup of coffee. By 8:40, every bay was occupied. By 9:15, they were doubling up. Pembroke was running the floor with the clipped efficiency of a man who used competence as armor. And to be fair, Clara thought his competence was real. She'd watched him work all week. His clinical instincts were sharp. His procedural execution was clean. The problem with Dr. Richard Pembroke was not that he was a bad doctor. The problem was that he was a good doctor who had confused his own excellence with infallibility, and that particular confusion in medicine was the kind that eventually killed someone. It hadn't happened yet. Clara intended to make sure it didn't happen on her watch. She was managing 3 patients simultaneously, standard for the pace of this morning, when the call came in from triage. Male estimated mid-40s, hit-and-run pedestrian versus vehicle, found by a passing motorist on Clement Street, partially conscious. Brought in by ambulance. GCS on scene had been reported as 11, which meant he was there responding, eyes open, tracking, but not entirely there. The paramedics rolled him through the double doors at 9:42. Clara was 6 feet away when they came in, finishing a note on Bay 11's chart, and she looked up the way she always looked up when the doors opened. Automatic trained the reflex of someone who had learned that the first 3 seconds of looking at a trauma patient told you more than the first 3 minutes of reading their chart. She looked at the man on the gurney, and something in her went absolutely still. Usaram. He was big, broad through the shoulders, the kind of physical build that wasn't gym-constructed, but work-constructed, load-bearing, functional. His face was cut along the left temple, dried blood tracking down toward his jaw. His right arm was cradled against his body at an angle that suggested more than a simple contusion. His eyes were half open and tracking imprecisely, which was the thing that registered first. Not the blood, not the arm, but the eyes. The quality of his awareness. What do we have? Pembroke's voice coming up behind her. The lead paramedic, a woman named Torres, who Clara had seen 3 times this week, and who had a directness Clara appreciated, delivered the report fast. Mid-40s male found down on Clement Witness, reported vehicle contact, no ID on him, strong odor of alcohol at scene, GCS 11 on pickup, currently 12 vitals or Bay 2, Pembroke said. Alcohol and trauma protocol, head CT when he's stable. His right arm, Clara said. Pembroke looked at her. What? The way he's holding his right arm, that's not a soft tissue response. That's guarding. The angle suggests possible internal. He was hit by a car, Thompson. The patience in his voice had a ceiling she could see approaching. Trauma protocol covers extremity assessment. His breathing, she said. She wasn't looking at Pembroke now. She was looking at the patient. Torres, what was his respiratory rate on scene? Torres checked her notes. 22. And now, Torres looked at the monitor the paramedics had him on. 26. 4 breaths per minute in 9 minutes of transport. Clara's mind moved fast and quiet the way it moved when it mattered. Not anxiety calculation. A man whose respiratory rate was climbing in the absence of exertion meant a man whose body was compensating him for something. And a man with a kind of physical bearing, this man had the kind that didn't betray pain easily, that absorbed and concealed, would have to be in significant internal distress before it showed up in his numbers at all. I want to check his abdomen before we move him, she said. Thompson. 30 seconds, she said. She was already moving at the gurney. Sir, she said to the man, direct, clear, close to his ear. Can you hear me? I need you to tell me if this hurts. His eyes found her, not the unfocused roam of someone truly impaired, a deliberate search. He was looking for her voice, finding it. Yeah, he said. His voice was rough and low. Hear you. Good. I'm going to press on your abdomen. Tell me where the pain is. She palpated quickly, methodically, starting from the lower right quadrant and working across. When she reached the upper left, his entire body tensed, not a flinch, not a gasp, but a whole body brace, the kind of involuntary response that happens below the level of conscious control, The kind that comes from years of training yourself not to react and finding the limits of that training. There, she said, not a question. Yeah, he said again. His jaw was set. His eyes were still on her. On a scale of 1 to 10. A pause. 8. And the way he said it, calibrated honest, the voice of someone who had a very precise and personal understanding of what a 10 actually felt like, told her something else, something beyond the clinical. She straightened up. She looked at Pembroke. He needs an abdominal ultrasound before anything else. I think he's bleeding internally. His vitals are compensated, she said. He is actively compensating, and he is very, very good at it. She held Pembroke's gaze. We need the fast exam now. The room was still for exactly 2 seconds, the particular stillness of a moment where two forces meet and everyone around them waits to see which one yields. Pembroke looked at the patient, then at Clara, then at Torres, who was watching with the expression of someone keeping very careful neutrality. Fine, he said. Bay 2, fast on intake. He moved away. Clara exhaled through her nose, turned back to the gurney. The man's eyes were still on her. You're going to be okay, she said. Heard that before, he said. Was it true? The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. Most of the time. We'll maintain that record, she said. The fast exam bedside ultrasound designed to detect free fluid in the abdomen, fast enough to run in minutes if you knew what you were doing, was performed by Marcus, who had the technique and the speed, and who looked at Clara over the patient's chest when the image came up on screen with an expression that contained no surprise whatsoever. Free fluid. Left upper quadrant. Significant. Splenic laceration, Marcus said quietly. Yeah, Clara said. He's bleeding. He is. Pembroke's going to say, I know what he's going to say. She was already moving to the door. Get surgical on the phone, now, don't wait for me. She found Pembroke in the hallway. Bay 2's fast is positive. LUQ free fluid, likely splenic. He needs surgical consult immediately. Something moved across Pembroke's face, a rapid internal recalibration, the shift of a man updating his model under conditions he hadn't anticipated. To his credit, it was fast. How much fluid? Enough that waiting for CT risks, get surgical. He was already turning, already moving. I did. Marcus is calling now. Pembroke looked back at her. Just for a second. In that second, there was something she hadn't seen from him before, not gratitude exactly, but the precursor to it. The raw material. The moment before a man decides whether to acknowledge something or bury it. He buried it. She expected that. But she'd seen it. The surgical team arrived in 11 minutes. The patient still unidentified, no wallet, no phone recovered at the scene logged in the system, simply as John Doe Bay 2 was prepped and moving toward the OR in 14. Clara stood at the bay entrance and watched them take him. Kim appeared beside her. You caught another one, she said. The fast caught it. Because you ordered it. Because his body told me to. Clara turned from the door. How's his pressure holding? Dropping. Slowly but dropping. Kim hesitated. They think it's a grade 3 laceration minimum. He's going to need a transfusion in there. He'll get it. Clara, Kim's voice was different, quieter, more careful. There's something weird. Clara looked at her. When they were prepping him for transport, Kim said his sleeve rode up, his left arm. She stopped. He has a tattoo, military insignia, and there's scarring, not accident scarring, old scarring, multiple sites. She paused again. Dave recognized the insignia. He said it's a SEAL tattoo. The hallway was loud with the ordinary noise of a busy floor. Clara stood in the middle of it and felt something recalibrate quietly inside her. A SEAL, mid-40s, no ID, found on the street and logged as a drunk. Who made the call on the alcohol? Clara asked. The witness who called it in. And Torres said there was a smell. A smell, Clara said. Or something that smelled like alcohol. Kim stared at her. What's the difference? The difference, Clara said carefully, is whether a man was drinking or whether he was set up to look like he was. Kim opened her mouth, closed it. I know how it sounds, Clara said. I'm not saying that's what happened. I'm saying no one should be logging assumptions as facts in this chart until we know who he is. She was already walking back to the station. Has anyone run his fingerprints? We can't just, The police should have been called the moment he came in as a hit-and-run victim, Clara said. Was that done? A beat of silence. I don't know. Find out, Clara said. Please, Decker. The call to the police had been made technically, procedurally, a box checked. What had not been done was a follow-up. What had not been done was a request for identification assistance. The officer who'd taken the initial report had noted it as a likely drunk pedestrian and moved on because a busy morning produces a bias toward the simplest explanation, and the simplest explanation is almost always right except for when it catastrophically isn't. Clara requested an ID follow-up. She was told it would take time. She said she understood, and she did, and she followed up again 40 minutes later, and then again after that, because she had learned that in bureaucratic systems, the difference between something getting done and not getting done was very often simply the presence of someone who refused to let it drop. Pembroke passed her at the station while she was on the phone with the non-emergency line. Thompson, he said, slowing. The John Doe is in surgery. His care is with the surgical team now. I'm trying to identify him, she said. That's an administrative function. Then I'm doing an administrative function. He looked at her for a moment. Then he walked away. She kept making calls. The surgery took 2 hours and 20 minutes. Clara was on her 4th patient of the afternoon when Marcus found her and said simply, "He's out, stable, ICU for now." She nodded, finished what she was doing, got through the next hour. At 3:15, a police detective arrived at the floor, a man named Holt 50s, the compressed efficiency of someone who spent his days processing other people's worst moments and had made a kind of peace with that. He found Clara at the station because Roberta pointed him there without commentary, which Clara noted. "You're the one who flagged the ID request," Holt said. "I am. We ran prints through the system." He opened his notebook. "Your John Doe is Commander David Reynolds, Naval Special Warfare. Active duty currently on looks like some kind of detached assignment details or above my clearance." He looked up. "There's a contact number listed for his CO. I've made the call. Someone will be here within the hour." Clara absorbed this without letting it show on her face the way it was landing internally. David Reynolds, active duty SEAL commander, detached assignment, and someone had hit him with a vehicle and left him on a street with what appeared to be alcohol near the scene. "Detective," she said carefully, "in your experience, hit-and-run victim has no ID. There's an alcohol component that no one at the scene actually witnessed him consuming. What does that suggest to you?" Holt looked at her for a long moment. "It suggests," he said slowly, "that it's worth taking a closer look at the scene." "Yes," she said, "it does." He wrote something in his notebook. "You prior military, Army medical, 12 years. He nodded slowly, the nod of someone connecting dots. "I'll make some calls about the scene," he said. "Thank you, Miss Thompson," she said. "Clara Thompson." He left. She turned back to the station. Pembroke was standing 10 feet away. She hadn't heard him approach. He was close enough that he had heard the conversation or most of it. His face was doing something complicated. The expression of a man standing at the edge of an understanding he'd been actively avoiding and finding that the edge was closer than he'd thought. "Reynolds," he said, "the John Doe." "Commander David Reynolds," she said. "Active duty, Naval Special Warfare." A silence. "The alcohol," Pembroke said, "was never confirmed as consumption," Clara said. "It was an assumption made at scene and carried forward." He was quiet. She watched the machinery of it, working behind his eyes, the dismantling of a narrative. He'd accepted the reconstruction required to replace it, the particular discomfort of a precise and intelligent man discovering that precision had failed him not in medicine but in assumption. "If you hadn't ordered the fast," he said finally. "I know," she said. "He would have gone to CT. Time to diagnosis would have been—" "I know," she said again. She wasn't twisting the knife. She was just standing there, letting him arrive at the truth at his own speed because she'd learned that the truths people found themselves were the ones they actually kept. Pembroke straightened, adjusted his coat, made the small physical recalibrations of a man pulling himself back into his professional posture. "Good catch," he said. 2 words, flat measured, costing him more than they sounded like they cost. He walked away. Clara stood there. She didn't feel triumphant. She didn't feel vindicated. She felt tired in the specific, bone-deep way of someone who had been right in conditions where being right was never the point, where the only point, the only thing that mattered from the beginning was whether the person in front of her was going to live. Commander David Reynolds was going to live. That was the point. That had always been the only point. At 4:50, Yolanda Harris appeared at the station with 2 cups of coffee, handed one to Clara without preamble, without performance, without anything except the simple gesture of a colleague recognizing another colleague at the end of a very long day. Clara took it. "You know," Yolanda said, leaning against the counter, looking out at the floor, "I've been in this department for 11 years. I've seen a lot of new hires." "And," Clara said, "and most of them spend their first 2 weeks trying to prove they belong here." She paused. "You spent yours just being here, just doing the work." Clara drank her coffee. "Pembroke's going to have to reckon with a lot," Yolanda said. "The report, Reynolds, the Morrow case, it's going to pile up on him." "That's between him and his conscience," Clara said. "Is it?" "It's not mine to manage," Clara said. "I have patience." Yolanda was quiet for a moment, then Reynolds's Kyo is coming in. "I know. Whatever's going on with the circumstances of the accident, Detective Holt is handling it." "Right." Yolanda looked at her. "You're not curious about what a SEAL commander was doing." "I'm curious about everything," Clara said. "But curiosity isn't my job right now. My job is the next patient through that door." As if on cue, because the ER had a dark sense of theater, the ambulance bay doors opened. Both women straightened. A new gurney, a new crisis. The relentless, indifferent forward motion of a place that asked nothing of you except everything. Clara set down her coffee. She went to work. Reynolds' CO arrived at 6:12 in the evening. Clara knew the moment he walked through the doors because the floor changed. Not dramatically, not the way it changed when a trauma rolled in or a code was called. Subtly, the way a room changes when someone enters it who carries authority, not as a performance, but as a fact, the way gravity is a fact, unremarkable and absolute. He was a man named Captain Garrett, late 50s, silver-haired, wearing civilian clothes that somehow failed to make him look civilian. He moved through the ER the way men who have operated in high-stakes environments move through any space, reading it, mapping it, filing it away. His eyes found the nursing station in under 3 seconds, and he was already walking toward it before anyone had pointed him there. Roberta met him at the desk. Clara was close enough to hear. "I'm here for Commander Reynolds," Garrett said. His voice was the kind of quiet that didn't need volume. "I see you 3rd floor," Roberta said. Oh, then surprising Clara slightly, the nurse who identified him and coordinated his care is right there. She pointed not at the station in general, but specifically directly at Clara. Clara looked at Roberta. Roberta had already looked back at her screen. Garrett turned, his eyes found her, assessed her in the same practiced instant she'd assessed him. She saw the moment he clocked her posture, her bearing the particular way she held herself that you didn't learn in nursing school. He crossed to her in 6 steps. "Thompson," he said. "Yes, sir." "Army wishing. 12 years. Pentagon," he nodded once. The nod of a man who has just placed someone in a category he understands and trusts. "Talk to me about Reynolds." She did. Concise, precise, sequential, the way you brief someone who needs information, and not narrative, who wants facts arranged in order of operational significance. Hit and run found down, GC, 11 respiratory compensation. Fast positive, grade 3, splenic laceration, surgical repair, currently stable in ICU. She gave him the timeline. She gave him the clinical picture. She gave him the detail about the alcohol that wasn't confirmed as consumption, and she watched his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly when she said it. "The detective," he said when she finished. "Holt. He went back to the scene this afternoon. I haven't heard results." "I have," Garrett said. His voice was flat and controlled, and beneath the control was something hard. "The alcohol wasn't his. There was a broken bottle found in the gutter 12 feet from where he went down. No alcohol in his system at all. Toxicology from surgery confirms it." He paused. Someone ran him down deliberately and staged the scene. The hallway noise continued around them. Clara stood in it and felt the specific cold clarity of a thing she'd suspected becoming a thing she knew. "Is he safe?" she asked. "Here, in this hospital." Garrett looked at her. Something shifted in his expression, not surprise exactly, but the recognition of someone asking exactly the right question. "We're handling that," he said. "Good," she said. "I need to go see him." "3rd floor. I'll walk you up." Reynolds was awake. That was the first thing he was awake and oriented, which the surgical team had flagged as ahead of schedule because men who operated at his level of physical conditioning recovered from anesthesia with the same stubborn efficiency they brought to everything else. He was sitting up at 30 degrees IV, lines running, monitors attached, and when Clara came through the ICU door with Garrett behind her, his eyes went first to Garrett, a long communicative look between two people who had a shared language that predated words, and then to Clara. He looked at her the way he'd looked at her in the ER, direct, deliberate. "You're the nurse," he said. "I'm a nurse," she said. "Clara Thompson." "Army Isra," he said, not a question. "You read that fast." "I read people fast," he said. "Occupational necessity." His voice was still rough from the anesthesia, but his eyes were sharp, completely sharp. "You ordered the ultrasound." "I did. Pembroke didn't want you to." It wasn't a question either. She held his gaze. The clinical picture supported it. "Pembroke," Garrett said from behind her, his voice carrying a specific weight. "Is that the attending who logged my commander as a drunk?" "He logged him as a trauma patient with suspected alcohol involvement based on the scene report," Clara said carefully. "Those were the facts as presented. Those were the assumptions as presented," Garrett said. "Yes," Clara said, "they were." Reynolds was watching this exchange with the focused attention of a man running calculations. "But you didn't accept the assumptions." "I accepted the patient," Clara said, "not the assumptions about him." Reynolds was quiet for a moment. His right hand, his left arm was occupied with the IV, moved slightly, a small involuntary gesture that she read as the kind of thing people did when they were deciding whether to say something important. "I was coming out of a meeting," he said. His voice had shifted, lower, more careful. "Classified. I wasn't supposed to be in that part of the city. I made a judgment call about a route." He stopped. "Someone was waiting for that judgment call." Garrett put a hand on his shoulder briefly. "Dave?" "She's cleared for this," Reynolds said. He looked at Clara. "You kept my file clean when you flagged the alcohol inconsistency. You kept the investigation from going the wrong direction before it started." His jaw worked briefly. "That matters more than you know." Clara looked at him steadily. "I flagged it because it wasn't accurate, that's all." "No," Reynolds said. "That's not all. That's the thing people say when they want to be modest about a thing that mattered enormously." He held her gaze with the unblinking directness of someone who had spent decades in environments where softening the truth was a luxury no one could afford. "You did it when the easier thing, the path of least resistance in a department where you were already under fire, was to let it go and move on." She had no answer for that. She didn't try to make one. "I'm going to be out of here in a few days," Reynolds said. "When I am, I want to come down to that ER." "You should focus on recovery," she said. "I will," he said. "And then I'm coming down to that ER." He said it the way people said things that were already decided and were only being communicated as a courtesy. "Is Thompson your actual name or a cover?" Despite everything, the weight of the room, the clinical gravity, the complicated coil of everything that had happened in the last 10 hours, Clara laughed. A real one. Brief, genuine surprise out of her. "It's my actual name," she said. "Good," Reynolds said. "I like to know the names of the people who saved my life. I've needed to use them more than once." She went back to the floor. The evening shift was already deep into its rhythm, the particular late-day acceleration of an ER that had been running hot all day and hadn't found a break. Clara moved through it the way she'd been moving through it for 9 days, focused, present, efficient. The noise of the larger situation filed away in the part of her mind reserved for things that needed processing, but not right now. Marcus caught her at the medication station. He had the look of someone carrying information he wasn't sure what to do with. "The admin review of Pembroke's incident report," he said quietly. "It's been escalated." Clara looked at him. "To who?" "Hospital leadership. Dr. Chen, the chief medical officer." He hesitated. "Yolanda's statement got attention, and apparently the documentation you submitted was—" He stopped, started again. "Someone in admin described it as unusually complete." "I documented what happened," Clara said, "with timestamps and clinical notations and a full vital sign log going back to the beginning of your first observation." He looked at her. "You've been building a record since day one." "I document everything," she said. "It's a habit." From the army. From everywhere things matter. She closed the medication cart. Marcus, this isn't something I'm pursuing. If the administration reviews it and makes a decision, that's their process. I'm here to take care of patients. And if their process ends Pembroke's career, she was quiet for a moment. That's not something I caused. That's something he caused, and I documented. She met his eyes. Those are different things. He held her gaze, nodded slowly. Yeah, he said. I guess they are. How come? Pembroke found her at 9:47. The floor had thinned slightly, the particular lull that sometimes emerged in late evenings between the daytime surge and the overnight chaos. She was charting in the alcove near Bay 8, the quiet, focused work of documentation that most people found tedious, and that Clara found in its own way meditative. The record, the account, the version of events that existed beyond memory and politics in the distortions of ego. He appeared at the edge of the alcove. She heard him before she saw him, the specific quality of someone stopping rather than passing. She kept charting for a moment. Then she looked up. He looked like a man who had aged 4 hours in the wrong direction. Not broken, Pembroke was too structural for that, but something in his architecture had shifted. The absolute certainty that had operated as his foundation was showing cracks not in the surface, but beneath it in the way the whole thing held weight. He didn't say anything immediately. She didn't prompt him. Dr. Chen's office called me at 8, he said finally. I heard the review was escalated, she said. My report, your response, Yolanda's statement. He said each piece like he was laying them on a table, arranging them, trying to see the shape they made together. And now Reynolds. He stopped. His CO called Dr. Chen directly. She had not known that. She kept her face even. I treated him as a drunk, Pembroke said. The words came out stripped of everything, no justification, no scaffolding, no professional language to soften them. Just the fact. I looked at that man and I made a decision about who he was before I knew anything about him. And he stopped. If you hadn't ordered the fast revealed what was there, Clara said. It would have been found eventually. Eventually might have been. I know, she said. Another silence. She watched him working through it, the internal arithmetic of a man who prided himself on precision, discovering that his most dangerous errors weren't clinical, but human. That the gap between what he thought and what was true had not been in his medicine, but in his assumptions. In the hierarchy he'd built in his mind where some people warranted full attention and some people warranted managed attention, and the difference between those categories was not clinical evidence, but something far older and far less defensible. I was wrong about the sepsis call, he said. I was wrong about Reynolds. I was wrong about... He stopped. He looked at her directly, and in his eyes was something she recognized because she'd seen it in other men who'd arrived at this particular precipice, the men who were good enough and honest enough to look at what they'd done without running from it. I was wrong about you. The alcove was quiet. You don't have to tell me that, she said. No, he said. I do. He said it firmly, without sentiment, not performing remorse, not managing her reaction, just stating it. I saw your background, and I placed you in a box. I decided what you were capable of before I'd seen you work. And then when you demonstrated, he exhaled. I filed a report against you for demonstrating competence because it threatened something I didn't want to examine. Clara set down her pen. Dr. Pembroke, she said. Richard. She used his first name deliberately and watched him receive it without flinching. I didn't come to this hospital to dismantle anything. I came here to take care of patients. That's what I've been doing. I know that now. You're a good doctor, she said, and she meant it the same way she'd meant it when she'd thought it on day one. Like, you're technically excellent and your clinical instincts are real. None of what happened this week was about that. What was it about, he asked, and it was a genuine question, not rhetorical, not defensive. The question of a man who was genuinely trying to understand something about himself. It was about the difference, she said carefully, between knowing your field and knowing your limits. One of those things can be taught in a medical school. The other one, she picked up her pen again. The other one usually requires something harder than school. He stood there for a moment longer. Then he straightened, not the restored performance of earlier in the week, but something quieter. A man putting himself back together along slightly different lines. The administrative review, he said. Whatever they decide, I won't be contesting it. She looked up at him. That's between you and the administration. I know. He held her gaze for one more moment. Good night, Thompson. Good night, she said. He left. She went back to her charting. Her hand was completely steady. Reynolds came down on the fourth day after surgery. He was in a wheelchair, hospital protocol, not necessity, and the expression on his face communicated his precise feelings about that pushed by a young Navy corpsman who had the practiced blankness of someone accustomed to transporting men who would rather be walking. The ER was in mid-morning rhythm. Clara was at the station when they came through the elevator. Kim saw them first and went still in a way that made Dave look up from his chart, which made Marcus turn around, which meant that by the time Reynolds' wheelchair cleared the elevator door, there were 4 people in the immediate vicinity paying close attention. Clara walked to meet them. Reynolds looked better. The cut on his temple had closed cleanly. His color was back. His eyes were the same, fully present, fully intentional, the eyes of a man who processed everything and discarded nothing. You're supposed to be in bed, she said. I'm in a chair, he said. Close enough. Is it? In my professional experience, close enough is a tactical position. He looked at her steadily. I told you I was coming down. You did, she said. He looked around the floor, at the station, at the bays, at the steady motion of people doing the work of keeping other people alive. Then he looked back at Clara. 4 days ago, I was a John Doe drunk on a street, he said, because that's what everyone decided I was. His voice was even. Not angry past anger in the territory beyond it, where things became simply true. You looked at me and you didn't decide anything. You just looked. That's the job, she said. No, he said. That's who you are. The job is a lot of things. That part, he stopped. That part is a choice every time. The floor was doing what floors do, moving, working the background noise of urgency and effort and ordinary human crisis. Nobody had stopped, but Clara was aware in the peripheral way of someone trained to track a room that the people around her had gone quiet in the specific way of people pretending not to listen while listening completely. She watched Reynolds place his hands on the arms of the wheelchair, watched the corpsman step back without being asked. Reynolds pushed himself to his feet. He did it carefully. He was 4 days post-surgery, and his body was in the early stages of demanding the kind of respect he'd spent a career refusing to give it, but he did it completely. He stood at his full height, which was considerable, and he straightened, and something in the quality of the air in the immediate vicinity changed. Then Commander David Reynolds, active duty, Naval Special Warfare, looked at Clara Thompson, Army veteran, 12 years combat medical, and he brought his right hand up, and he saluted her. Crisp, clean, held. The salute of one warrior to another, crossing the branch lines and the rank lines and every other line that people in uniforms sometimes use to create distance between themselves and landing in the place where service recognized service and courage recognized courage. Clara stood still for exactly 1 second. Then she returned it. Her hand came up with the muscle memory of 12 years clean, precise, the motion of someone for whom this gesture had once been daily and had never in its deepest meaning become ordinary. The room had stopped moving. She was aware of it the way you're aware of weather's changing in your skin rather than your mind. Kim had her hand over her mouth. Dave had set down his chart. Marcus was very still. Roberta at the front desk had turned fully around for the first time since Clara had arrived, not performing attention, but simply unable not to look. Reynolds lowered his hand. Clara lowered hers. Thank you, Sergeant Thompson, Reynolds said. He used the rank the way you used a name, returning something to someone that had been temporarily set aside. Her throat tightened once. She controlled it. Commander. He held her gaze for another moment. Then he sat back down and the corpsman stepped forward, and the routine of the floor began to reassemble itself around them, the way water fills the space left by something moved. But not entirely. Something had shifted, the way things shift when an acknowledged truth replaces an assumed one. Not loud, not announced, just different, permanent. Yolanda found her in the break room 15 minutes later. Clara was sitting at the table with a cup of coffee, both hands wrapped around it, not drinking, just holding the warmth. Yolanda sat across from her. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Dave cried, Yolanda said finally. I know, Clara said. He told me he didn't, but he did. I know, Clara said again. Another silence. Dr. Chen called Pembroke in this morning, Yolanda said, Before Reynolds came down. The review is complete. She paused. Pembroke is stepping down from chief attending. Voluntarily on paper. But the alternative was... I don't need to know the alternative, Clara said. No. Yolanda agreed. You don't. She studied her coffee. How do you feel? Clara thought about it honestly. Like I want to finish my shift, she said. Yolanda looked at her. That's it. That's it. Clara drank her coffee. I didn't come here to change anything, Yolanda. I came here to do a job. Whatever else happened, she shook her head. That's other people's stories. Pembroke's story, Gerald's story, Reynolds' story, and yours. Clara was quiet for a moment. Mine is the same as it always was, she said. Show up, pay attention, don't look away. Yolanda sat with firm. Outside the break room, the ER continued its relentless motion, the sound of gurneys and monitors and voices, the compressed urgency of a place that held the line between crisis and recovery every hour of every day, imperfectly and incompletely and without rest. The staff is different with you now, Yolanda said. Even the ones who never said a word to you before. I notice, Clara said. Does it matter to you that they see you now? Clara considered the question. Really considered it the way she considered things, not performing consideration, but actually going to the place where the honest answer lived. It matters that they'll see the next person, she said. The next one who comes in and gets put in the wrong box. The next patient. The next colleague. She set down her cup. If any of this changes how one person looks at one patient 6 months from now, a patient they would have written off, a concern they would have dismissed, then it mattered. Not because of me, because of them. Yolanda looked at her for a long moment. 12 years of military medicine, she said, and you ended up in my emergency room. I did, Clara said. We're lucky, Yolanda said simply. Clara picked up her cup, found it empty, and stood. She rinsed it at the sink. She straightened her badge. She rolled her shoulders, once the private, invisible preparation of someone getting ready to go back into the work. I'm lucky too, she said, and meant it. She went back to her patients. The week after Reynolds' salute, Mercy General was different in the way that places are different after something true has been said out loud in them, not transformed, not redecorated, but shifted at the foundation. The same hallways, the same noise, the same relentless forward motion of crisis and care, and the particular exhaustion that came from doing important work in imperfect conditions. But the air moved differently. The silences meant different things. Clara noticed it in small ways, the way she noticed everything incrementally accurately, without attaching more weight to it than it deserved. Dave started saying good morning. Not elaborately, just the words direct, the way a man says something when he means it and doesn't feel the need to dress it up. The first time he did it, Clara said good morning back and kept walking, and she could feel him watching her go, with the expression of a man who had expected something more and was quietly relieved not to get it. Marcus started asking her clinical questions. Real ones, not the carefully constructed questions of a resident performing curiosity, but the genuine, sometimes uncertain questions of someone who was actually trying to learn something. He'd appear at her elbow between patients with a chart in hand and a specific problem, and the honest admission that he wasn't sure. She answered him the same way every time, directly, completely, without condescension or performance. He absorbed it the way good students absorb things, which was hungrily and without acknowledgement, which was exactly right. Kim brought her coffee on Tuesday. Without being asked, without commentary, just set it on the counter beside her and walked away. It was the right temperature. Kim had been paying attention. These were small things. Clara held them carefully the way you hold small things that are actually large things in disguise. Pembroke's last day as chief attending was a Thursday. Clara knew because Yolanda told her quietly in passing, with the specific efficiency of someone delivering information that was relevant but not central. Pembroke himself said nothing about it, arrived at his usual time, ran his morning briefing with his usual precision, moved through his patients with a technical excellence that had always been real and had never been the problem. The difference was in what was absent. The performance was gone. The careful architecture of dominance, the pauses before acknowledging people, the selective attention, the monologues calibrated to remind a room of its hierarchy, none of it appeared. What was left stripped of all that was a physician doing his job. Clara watched it and felt something she hadn't expected to feel. Respect. Specific, clear-eyed, uncomplicated. Not for who he'd been, for who he was in the process of becoming. At 2 in the afternoon, he stopped beside her at the medication station. They hadn't spoken directly since the night in the alcove, 4 days of professional parallel motion, close but not intersecting. I spoke with Dr. Chen this morning, he said. I heard, she said. I recommended that you be formally mentored by Yolanda for the next quarter. He said it without preamble, without framing it as a gift. Your documentation practices and clinical observation skills should be incorporated into our resident training. I've put that in writing. She looked at him. You didn't need to do that, No, he said. I wanted to. He held her gaze. I spent 9 days trying to make you smaller. The least I can do is spend the next 9 months trying to make this department better because of what you showed me. He paused. If you'll allow it. She studied him for a moment, the honest, unguarded version of him that had emerged from the rubble of his certainty. Yes, she said, I'll allow it. He nodded, then he went back to his patients. She went back to hers. It was, she thought, the most honest conversation they'd ever had. The twist came on Friday morning, and it came from a direction no one had been watching. Clara was in the middle of a routine assessment, a 14-year-old with a suspected ankle fracture, very unhappy about it, communicating that unhappiness with the specific theatrical despair of adolescence, when Roberta appeared in the doorway of Bay 5 and said simply, Thompson, Dr. Chen's office, now. The way she said it had no readable temperature. Clara finished what she was doing, made sure the teenager was comfortable, and his mother had what she needed and walked to the elevator. Dr. Linda Chen was 63 Chinese American, the kind of small that contained an enormous amount of compressed authority. She had run Mercy General's medical operations for 7 years and had the reputation of someone who made decisions, slowly made them once, and stood behind them completely. Clara had seen her twice at a distance. She had never spoken to her. The office was on the 4th floor. Clara knocked, entered. Chen was at her desk with a file open in front of her. She looked up when Clara entered, gestured to the chair across from her without ceremony. Clara sat. Chen looked at her for a moment with the focused, assessing attention of someone who spent most of their professional life evaluating people and had developed a very short processing time. You've been here 11 days, Chen said. Yes. In 11 days, you've identified 2 critical cases missed by the attending physician, flagged an inconsistency in a patient's presentation that reframed an active police investigation filed, and won an administrative response against a formal complaint from a senior doctor, and were saluted by a naval special warfare commander in the middle of my emergency department. She said all of this with the flatness of someone reciting weather data. Did I miss anything? The beta blocker case, Clara said. Walter Chen, no relation, I assume medication interaction causing syncopal episodes. Referred to cardiology. A very brief pause. No relation, Chen confirmed. Something moved across her face that was not quite a smile. I'm going to ask you something directly, and I want a direct answer. All right. Why are you a nurse, Chen said. With your background, your training, your field experience, you could have come back and pursued an MD. You had the record for it. The VA would have supported it. Why a nurse? Clara had been asked versions of this question before. She had several answers prepared, most of them true, none of them complete. She looked at Chen and decided that a woman who asked questions directly deserved the complete version. Because nurses are in the room, she said. Doctors make decisions. Nurses stay. I spent 12 years in environments where the person who stayed, who kept watching after the initial call had been made, was the one who caught what the initial call missed. She held Chen's gaze. I want to be in the room, not above it. Chen was quiet for a moment. That's an unusual answer. It's an honest one. Yes, Chen said, it is. She closed the file. I'm creating a new role, patient safety clinical coordinator. It's a nursing role. I want to be clear about that it preserves exactly what you just described, but with expanded authority to flag clinical concerns across departments, initiate review protocols, and access cross-specialty data in real time. She folded her hands on the desk. It's a role that doesn't exist yet. I'm creating it because 11 days of watching your record made me realize it should have existed years ago. Clara sat with them. You'd be the first person to hold it, Chen said, which means you'd be building it from scratch, which means it will be difficult and political and occasionally thankless. I'm familiar with that environment, Clara said. I assumed you were. Chen held her gaze. The salary reflects a senior clinical position. You'd report directly to me and to Yolanda Harris. A pause. Pembroke recommended you for something less than this. I'm offering you more than he recommended because his recommendation made me look at your record myself, and your record told a different story than his summary did. Clara absorbed this. The specific irony of it, Pembroke's last professional act on his way out of the position he'd misused being the actress that opened a door he'd spent 11 days trying to close. What's your answer? Chen said. Yes, Clara said. No hesitation, no performance of deliberation. Yes. Chen nodded once. You start Monday in the new capacity. Yolanda will brief you on the administrative structure. She reopened the file. Thank you, Thompson. You can go. Clara stood. She walked to the door. She stopped with her hand on the frame. Dr. Chen, she said. Chen looked up. The role you're creating, Clara said. There are patients being dismissed in this building right now today, this morning, based on assumptions about who they are rather than what their bodies are telling us. Every day that role doesn't exist is a day someone gets missed. I know, Chen said. Her voice was quiet. That's why I'm creating it. Clara held her gaze for one moment, then she went back to work. She didn't tell anyone about the promotion that day, not because she was keeping it secret. It would be announced Monday, and everyone would know, but because the day didn't stop for personal news, and more importantly, she didn't want it to. The patients coming through those doors didn't care about her title. They cared about the same thing every patient cared about, that the person in front of them was actually looking, actually present, actually there. A woman came in at 4 with chest tightness that turned out to be a panic attack. Her third this month, and Clara sat with her for 20 minutes, not treating the panic attack, but listening to the life that was producing it. The husband in memory care, the daughter 3 time zones away, the specific loneliness of being the last person standing in a life built for 2. She didn't fix it. She couldn't fix it. She witnessed it, which was sometimes the most clinical thing you could do. An elderly man came in at 5:30, brought by his neighbor who'd found him confused on his porch. Clara ran the assessment fast and clean and had the answer in 12 minutes UT. A severe the kind that in older adults produced the cognitive symptoms of dementia and was missed with devastating frequency because people looked at the confusion and stopped there. She caught it because she'd been taught to always look one layer deeper than the presenting symptom. She'd been taught that in a field hospital, in a country she couldn't name in public, and by a doctor who was also a soldier who had learned it the same way. She thought of him sometimes. Of all of them. The people who'd made her what she was in conditions that forged things permanently. She carried them into every room she entered. At 7:15, the ER ran a code. It came in fast, a man in his late 50s, cardiac event, brought in by his wife who had done CPR in the parking lot of a grocery store while a stranger called 911, which was the kind of ordinary heroism that happened every day and was almost never acknowledged. The team mobilized with the compressed efficiency of people who had run this particular play enough times that the choreography was in their bodies rather than their minds. Clara was on the code team. She moved into position without instruction, without announcement, reading the room and filling the gap that needed filling. IV, access on the left side while the resident handled the right airway positioning, while the attending managed rhythm, the 1,000 small coordinations of a team working at the edge of what medicine could do. They worked him for 19 minutes. He came back at minute 16. Not dramatically, not the way it happened in television with the gasp and sudden consciousness. The quiet, stubborn return of a heart that had decided it wasn't finished. A rhythm on the monitor. A pressure reading. The specific hush that fell over a room when the thing everyone was working toward actually happened. Clara stepped back. Let the team do the next phase of stabilization. She stripped her gloves, washed her hands, and found the wife, a woman named Patricia, small and gray-haired and shaking in the controlled way of someone who had spent the last 40 minutes keeping herself together through an act of pure will, sitting in the family waiting area with a paper cup of cold coffee she hadn't touched. Clara sat beside her. He's stable, she said. His heart is beating on its own. He's going to be moved to the cardiac ICU. Patricia looked at her, her eyes filled in a slow, complete way, not the overflow of sudden news, but the release of something held under enormous pressure for a very long time. I thought I'd lost him, she said. In the parking lot. I thought he went down and she stopped. I don't know CPR. I took a class 8 years ago and I thought I'd forgotten everything, but my hands just knew. You saved him, Clara said, before we ever touched him. Don't let him know that, Patricia said. He'll never let me live it down. Clara laughed, the same genuine surprised laugh that Reynolds had pulled out of her, the kind that came from real human contact in the middle of everything else. Patricia reached out and took her hand, held it for a moment, said nothing else, said everything. At the end of her shift, Clara stood at the exit and looked back at the floor. It was the same as it had always been, loud and complicated and imperfect and relentless. Gurneys and monitors and voices and the constant grinding necessary work of holding the line between crisis and survival. No one had stopped. No one was going to stop. This place didn't pause for reflection or closure or the neat resolution of things. It just moved. Kim was at the station on the phone, gesturing at Marcus with her free hand for a chart she needed. Dave was in Bay 4, gruff and focused and completely present with his patient. Yolanda was at the far end of the hall, reading a scan result with the deep frown of someone who was working a problem and would not stop working it until she had the answer. And Pembroke, she found him last because she hadn't been looking for him, was at Bay 9, sitting in a chair pulled close to an elderly patient's bed, not standing over, not performing authority, sitting, listening, his hands folded and his attention entirely given to the person in front of him. It was not absolution. It was not transformation. It was a man in the early difficult stages of becoming something better than what he'd been and doing it the only real way, one patient, one moment, one choice at a time. Clara turned and walked out. The night air was cool. She stood still for a moment, just breathing the simple private luxury of a breath taken outside in the space between one version of the day and whatever came next. 11 days. She'd been here 11 days. 11 days ago, she had walked through those doors thinking about parking and peanut butter crackers and the strange gravity of a new beginning. She had been seen as a rookie, a military relic, a body to manage, and a concern to dismiss. She had been documented against and talked around and handed the tasks that were beneath her without apology. And she had stayed, not because she had something to prove, not because she needed anyone to see her, but because the work was real and the patients were real and every moment of inattention, every assumption left unchallenged, every dismissed concern was a Gerald, a Reynolds, a Walter Chen, a man in a parking lot whose wife's hands remembered what her mind thought it had forgotten. She had stayed because staying was the only thing she'd ever known how to do when it mattered. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number which she opened with the mild suspicion of someone who had spent 12 years in environments that made you careful about unknown numbers. It was a photograph, Gerald Morrow sitting up in what appeared to be his living room, a little girl on his lap, the granddaughter from the photograph in his wallet, real now present breathing, completely unaware that her grandfather's survival a week and a half ago had been a near thing. He was laughing at something off camera. His color was good. His eyes were bright. Below the photo, thought you should see this, Ellen Morrow. Clara looked at the photograph for a long time. This was the work, not the salutes, not the administrative victories, not the formal recognitions or the professional vindications, or the moments when the room went quiet because something undeniable had happened. Those things mattered, but they were not the work. The work was Gerald laughing in his living room with his granddaughter on his lap. The work was Patricia's hands that remembered. The work was the next person through those doors, whoever they were, whatever box someone had already put them in. The work was looking at that person and seeing them clearly, completely, without the distortion of assumption or exhaustion or ego, and staying in the room long enough to know the truth of them. Clara put her phone in her pocket. She thought about tomorrow, the new role, the resistance it would generate and the ground it would have to cover, and the 10,000 small and glamorous moments of building something from nothing in an institution that had been comfortable with its gaps for too long. She thought about the patients she hadn't met yet, the ones already on their way. Some of them frightened, some of them dismissed before they'd even arrived, some of them carrying conditions that would be invisible until someone decided to look past the obvious and into the real. She thought about 12 years of training that had always been pointed at this, not at the battlefield, not at the tent hospitals, in the triage calls, in the places she couldn't name in public, but at this, the person who stayed. The one who kept watching after everyone else had moved on. The one whose job was not to be right, but to be present consistently and without vanity in the space between what was assumed and what was true. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. Clara Thompson took a breath, turned and walked back through the doors. She had work to do.